Even this cold. We got crickets again this week. Remember, crickets is not just not doing something. We just go along rubbing our little feet like nothing else is to do in the summer heat. It's also doing something that's not the right thing to do. And so I wasn't going to talk too much at all about this because it's so problematic in lots of ways. But I'm going to just mention something, again, mostly to get it on the record and maybe to counterpoint something here. I'm speaking now of the ongoing, if you haven't heard, the Hammond, Burns, Oregon. It's burning over there in Oregon, and it's got a stench to it, folks. I'm just going to tell you. The Hammonds, Bundy Hammond, is Hammond Bundy, I guess, is kind of leading the charge and taking over a wilderness shack out there from the Forest Service under the name of the Hammond problem. The Hammonds were convicted of arson on the forest between their ranch and the BLM land. Remember, we got a couple of agencies we got to deal with. And you got to kind of keep them straight because I just tell you, it makes a difference to keep them all straight. They all have different types of ways you get at. They have functions that work. Although I'll tell you, and don't ever underestimate this power. We're finding out that they're trying to evade this one. The FLIPMA applies to the Forest Service as well, and that's really killing them, and that's what they're trying to deny. But neither here nor there. There's a lot to really know about this, and we've had to learn about it in dealing with all these things. But the Hammonds got convicted, and they got convicted for essentially arson. And then it went back. The government said that, well, your sentence isn't enough. We have to make an enhancement due to terrorism. And the Ninth Circuit made the comment that, yeah, you're right, that should have been added. So now these farmers were charged as terrorists, and they didn't spend their sentence. They didn't pay their debt to society underneath that actual sentencing. Now, I'm not going to go through all this. This is such a convoluted point. In fact, I've made a very big point to stay away from it. But because it's becoming big news, and I'm really actually troubled by it. There's nothing I can do over it, though. I've been trying to get the word out of what I thought would be a much better way to go. And I think that's what I want to speak to right here for all you all that have been listening to me and understand. I've been telling you we can do these things without putting ourselves in jeopardy. And part of that is making that record. And you have to stick around long enough to do that, and you have to have the mind to do it. And I just tell you, anybody I've talked to that works with me, and we discussed this, and we have discussed it, it's pretty clear, and in retelling just confidence to us and how we think this is going down, it's very clear once we explain what really appears to have to have happened better. The people that we're talking to that listen to what we're saying, that also are not really integrated but are listening, they really have a whole lot of other thing to think about on this Hammond thing. So what I want to tell you here, and I'll just keep it as short as possible. My observation has been, and this is cutting through all the nonsense, whatever you believe, whatever you think, how the injustice, the justice, whatever you think is going on. There are things, they submitted themselves to a jurisdiction by arraignment. They agreed to the jurisdiction without challenging it. You will be told waives all your rights to challenge procedural things leading to the arraignment. You lose, once you arrange that jurisdiction and you've agreed to it, you've waived all your pre-plea remedies and avoidance. This is what they might call, you can find this, and I forgot to mention this, look for what they call a set-aside. That'll be your indication of limited, the only ones they'll tell you are the limited ones to form content in the statutes of a citation, of a complaint. There's others. But you're eliminating you're waiving, once you arrange the jurisdiction, you waive all the defects in those papers. What you don't ever waive is the competency of the people and establishments going on forward through that. And those are you can challenge those all the time. Now, what I'm bringing up here is it may be that they have arson convictions and those stand in law. And I guess, I mean, I don't like this. Here the courts are corrupt. The Bar Association sits there and is the obstruction. So you really have to really consider what I'm saying here, and it's categorically how we approach this and why we have to do these certain things. It makes it better if we do these certain things. And I've been one to make a record. I've found that's very powerful. That we have remedies in the law. Once they've agreed to go into the federal jurisdiction, they had to really, that's their consent. I have no right even to overstate their Hammond's consent. What I can do is look and see that there was apparently an injustice. I look at it from the producer side, from the landowner side, and it was in the UCY chat, and tomato or tomato. He brings up the idea with inholdings. Yeah, those are the disposals, folks. Those are what the inholdings of private interests, and they want to get rid of them. This is sustainable development, rewilding. Rewilding is one of the tools of the sustainable development agenda. So this is all integrated once you start to see it. That's why it's not that difficult. But within the judicial, if we can go to judicial, I don't think this side is judicial. They were put into a court and they agreed to that jurisdiction. That doesn't mean it was competent. So what I wanted to point out to you for everyone that's looking at this, and just consider it, that I think what's happening right now with Hammond Bundy coming up and doing what they're doing in their militia and all this other stuff is really way premature and wrong, as far as I can see what ought to have happened with respect if the answer was, the reason was the Bundys. And I notice they're now extending it off and trying to make a bigger issue of this. Now it's about a wildlife refuge that was taken up Wilderness Act or whatever. I didn't even get behind it. Once you understand the land law, you have a different way to go than what I see happening in Burns. That what I think ought to have happened, and I've been telling people for months and months that have asked or talked about it, that people like the representatives for the Oath Keepers and people that were intimate with the Hammonds and things like that, people were going to go talk to people. I've advanced what I thought they ought to do. And in the respect of, in commerce and in all these court cases and anything you do, it's a rule. And the rule is you undo things in the reverse order that they've been done to remove them. You can't just start in a jurisdiction and get to a sentence and go on, and then you don't do allocution, which means that you're saying, notwithstanding the verdict, I'm still innocent, and you let them make a decision if you agree to the jurisdiction, and then let it go to appeal, and then go out and go to guns and burns. You just don't do it that way. That I thought the better record to make, and they're not wrong where they're making the assertions that you hear about the jurisdictional frailties of this federal court system. The problem is that it doesn't come out of a barrel of a gun, that argument. That comes from the lead from a pencil on a piece of paper. That they have a more appropriate thing a record to make here, which is exactly what I mentioned earlier about the challenging the jurisdiction. They need to do that formally. I would rather see them do that formally. I'd want to see that they couldn't answer through the remedies of probably quo warranto. Most everybody wants to go to a motion. I'd say, no, you can't really do it that way. You got to petition that they didn't have jurisdiction up front, not give them the right of decision. You have to choose the right remedy as well, and you can't give them discretion. It has to be on the law that they respond, not pursuant to their judicial beliefs and opinions. And so I've been advocating that they should have went back, because they can challenge at any time, challenge through quo warranto a couple of things. Whether or not an Article 1 court is competent to hear an Article 3 matter, whether or not the judge sitting in the first court, not the second sentencing court, the sentencing court that gave him the sentence and modified it is really just administrative judge following the decision of the first court. The first court had to have a court established, the competence of which was over the subject matter of land disposal and land owner rights within the context of his use. The judge presiding or residing, see, the judges are the one that reside in that state, not you. Whether or not the judge was competent, they have to establish the competency of the court. They're supposed to then they establish whether or not their office was competent to reside in that court. And then, just to keep this much more simple, that court has to have a territory over which it presides to decide. And those are all challengeable, and we did this in our case in 2013. I was ready for it because I'd watched this thing come down all the time. They do this all the time. In fact, we attacked the clerk, an officer of the clerk. We said, show your warrant in law, quo warranto, show your warrant in law, your authority to transfer our case, an Article 3 required competent court of jurisdiction, to an Article 1 court. And we knew that because they transferred it to a United States District Court, and those are Article 1, Article 4 courts, Article 1 and bankruptcy courts. Those are not Article III courts. They're legislative, territorial courts. The question is, what's the territory over which they rule? And it's nothing that's within the states, actually. It's that veneer I keep telling you about. The Article 3 courts have jurisdiction over private rights regarding federal, if you will, national grants and inholdings, and it's a whole different concept. But the challenge is whether or not the court was competently established over the subject matter, whether the judge was commissioned in the competency of that court, and whether or not the territory over which that court rules extended to the land and extended to the ground where the people had the conduct. We did the quo warranto, and we found out that the clerk and the senior judge, which is not more than an administrative judge, he's not an Article 3 judge, he's given up, he's retired his Article 3 commission to be a senior judge. A retired commission is no longer the commission. It should be self-evident that the senior judge is not competent to hear an Article 3 matter, even in an Article 3 court. But the United States district courts are not competent Article 3 courts. They're Article 1 or maybe even Article 2 courts. They're all administrative, essentially. That the challenge that the Hammonds ought to be doing is essentially the challenge to these things. And they can do this at any time. They can still do this. Instead of what I hear going on, Bern, Oregon, the Burns, Oregon area, instead of that, people that are not even interested in that part of the case, that are going to cause themselves and a lot of other people a lot of trouble. This is not going to go well for good. This is going to be the poster child of how not to do it. So I guess that's what I want to be on record for as well. There was a different way to go to set the record. Now, I can just to extend that over to you. Can you understand a little bit better if a quo warranto, a demand on the officers to see, these authorities have to have been in the judgment. They have to state that. They'll gloss over it. They'll say, "Oh, this statute gives us the right to do this." Well, it doesn't, folks. You got to do constitutional establishments and commissions, and they've got to go through all the right things. And when you demand within the quo warranto, there's a bunch of things you demand about qualifying all this. You qualify their commission, their signature, their oath, all this stuff. You tell them, produce this so that we know you're a qualified officer, not just a usurper on the subject matter. We don't judge this either. It's an open demand that's required to be shown. It should be on the record. When it's not, you can demand it after, certainly. So they should have qualified now whether or not it was competent at all that an Article 1 court decide this, and over the territory. I've never found that the territorial legislative courts, United States district courts, have any landed jurisdiction. And yet every case you'll hear is through a USDC court. Now, what's the other court? Well, you're going to find out they're called, now listen to the order of the words, they're a district court of the United States. That doesn't mean by the name they are, but they still at least have the name differential. And if you pay attention to that in the cases, you'll see how they speak to this. And so my offer to you today was that it's been offered for months and months and months to people that I could get out to that had an interest, that were actually inquiring with me. One of them was the Oath Keepers, and I understand now the Oath Keepers are not part of this, and I don't know how much what I've told them about what ought to happen may have factored into that they're not a part of this. I don't know. The point is I saw a different way that ought to have happened, at least to make the record. Can you understand that if the court was issued a quo warranto, a demand to produce the warrant in law, they had to act in the court and all that if they couldn't produce that this case would prove what the people are saying there, that the court didn't have jurisdiction, that it was a state matter, that the Forest Service is a mere proprietor, like any other proprietor on the land, not the sovereign. As against a grantee having the rights. I don't know how this all works out. I'm just saying there's a different way to approach this. There's a record to be made as the legitimacy of the competency of the various official qualifications that must be made in law to validate this judgment. And until I can see that myself, we have to go with what the record says. In the absence of a challenge, that's not your right or my right to challenge. That's the one who gets beat down by this system to do. As I tell you, this is like miners. The microcosm of the miner, I'll say this, I haven't said this in a long time, I'll say it right now. The microcosm of the miner is the macrocosm we call America. And the dysfunction of the minor reflects out into the dysfunction of America. The dysfunction of the lack of the knowledge of the remedies of what they're up against is the same reflection. The lack of the ability to act upon that is the same reflection in society. A lot of interested people are doing the wrong thing, in my estimation. When I can find another better thing to do, that's why I make my decision. Because I wanted to make a record that's out of our opinion. When I started seeing them throw in the wilderness refuge areas and stuff, I realized this thing's gone way off. We may be looking at a bunch of operatives working this. And then I find out Centilli's in the mix already. I just don't know. So I always focus, try to get it out of the opinion, try to really look at this a little bit better. We're in a bad way in this country. The judicial system is a fraud. It's a corruption. There's no doubt. Despite that, we still have to act more properly. And I think we can make the record that shows everybody how wrong the federal court orders and decisions have been. You understand that when it went from the United States District Court, if it was in an Article 3 court, it could not go to the Ninth Circuit on appeal. This is all in the law. This is all what we sued back to show in a quo warranto against the senior judge that attempted to terminate a remedy that we were doing. There's no provision for a termination, not even if he had qualifications. But this is the subtleties of the details that you have to pay attention to. So I guess I've said way enough here. I believe that there was being that they qualified the jurisdiction by arrangement, they have to go through the process. The main thing that everyone needs to do is challenge the authorities. There's a certain remedies to do that. You want to talk about common law? You want to talk about using the law that the Constitution supports? Then why are all these flag wavers not using it? It's really frustrating, actually. So I'm going to get off on a tangent in that frustration. I don't want to do that. I think there's a different record to make, and I think that record will tell everybody. If these people knew how to do that, this record will tell everybody exactly what the people are fired up about is the truth, and dispel every doubt and not keep any question on the action of the people that are coming wrongly, essentially, to make an armed takeover of a outbuilding for the Forest Service. How ridiculous. And armed at that. So, I guess I'm going to stay right there. I think there's a different remedy. I think we needed to see this. It still can be done. Anybody who has a better contact to these people than I do needs to start promoting it, I think. I don't know why it's not the better idea. I think it's a lot better than putting people at risk for who knows what all. Death to destruction, to just being put in a cage forever because they just got frustrated. Moving on. Freakers Ball. Friday nights, Moose Girl and Grimner, they were doing the prediction show for the coming through the year, and I suppose it's a happy new year. Isn't that amazing? Boy, we're like 3 times farther into the year. I want to talk about some hyperbole. We're 3 times farther, folks, than when we started the year, into the year. Yeah, we're 3 days into it already. It's already going to click on to 2017. But during Freakers Ball, they were talking about calendars. When is all this? All these dates? And Grimner was I think it was Grimner that was reading off of a whatever page. I don't know what he was reading. But he said a statement, a little word term. It caught my mind, and I realized early on when I was doing my study, people I think underappreciate the importance of calendars and timing. In fact, I think in the military, timing is probably the most important thing they keep track of and make sure that they know. Even though it's invented now, and even though their systems are wrapped around it, and maybe properly so, this is a very crucial thing. But for me, it was important. One term Grimner, I think it was Grimner reading, that I wanted to touch on, because it's something I have not applied. There's a lot of other things you can apply before this one. But remember, we're talking about when you act within the jurisdiction the way they want you to act, and you take on the names and the numbers that they want you to take, and you don't deny them, you don't attack someone who fraudulently or uses them against you to mischaracterize your actual nature and character, as I've been telling you to do in the beginning of all these things. And this could be done in the Hammonds too, but I don't want to get back over here. There's certain requisites that go on. As I told you, the set-aside, There's certain conforming requirements for content on these complaints and citations. One of which is the date. And a long time back I fixed on these things, that there's a whole list of things that have to happen, that when I talk to you about being outlaw, this is the jurisdiction we're talking. If you're outside the constraint of their requirements, and you live by another way, they're a lot harder pressed to be able to grab onto you. And what we end up doing is giving in to all these facts that they put on that actually give them the authority. And the term civil calendar came up in I think Grimner's reading. And I apologize for not being able to look at the chat. I know Grimner's probably explaining all this to me right now, but as far as his doing that, or if not, at any rate. So I wanted to touch on that, because the calendar dating is very, very interesting and important. It tracks jurisdictions. Very critical to understand here as well. I've never used this argument yet, but it's there to use. I just want to point out, there are other things that are sitting in there that we gloss over in what we're told is what we need to do. And we live in a reality that's been made for us, and we never question that. What day do you live in? Does it matter? And if it doesn't, or if it's different, maybe that's an evidence that you haven't participated and agreed with someone else trying to impose it. Again, this is not silver bullets. These are things to think about. I have not used it. I want to make sure you know this. I have not used this, but it is a set-aside condition if you so choose to do the research to bring it forward. Let me read a portion to show you about this term civil calendar being mentioned. For it's not in the names of the calendars. Those delegate what civil calendar you'll follow. But understand the civil term here. Civil. And it's not. It's civilized. It's enfranchised. It's enfranchisement. And it comes through jurisdictions and marks their time. My question to you is, are you actually in that time? Or do you just adopt that time? The Julian calendar, which is where I heard this in reading, not the source, but the type, the Julian calendar, Julius Caesar, I suppose. I guess I could read all that. I don't want to read it. I'll get to the point. The Julian calendar has been replaced as the civil calendar by the Gregorian calendar in all countries which formerly used it, although it continued to be the civil calendar of some countries in the 20th century. I'm going to end right there. I want to keep focused on the civil calendar, not the name of the calendar, but what is determined to be the civil calendar. And for those of you who want to go look it for yourself, you can just read this out of the basics. They're sitting in their wiki, good enough to get us on the track. There's a lot more to understand behind this when you do reading go to the libraries and do the research on this. It's fascinating, actually. It's mind-numbing to see how much information is around calendars and dates and time and maps. And you start realizing the importance when they say these things are published as facts or are facts and evidence. You start finding out this whole existence of reality is based somewhere into some court trial somewhere. The facts of which you're free to make challenge to, as I've been trying to show you in other areas, when they mischaracterize you by making a name designation that's actually not yours, or a status designation that doesn't actually exist, or a declaration of money that shows you're in a commerce jurisdiction, which you did not do. All these things are pre-plea remedies and avoidance, of all of which are waived once you arrange that jurisdiction, as I said the Hammonds did. I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying that if they had an attorney that the guy would have. That's another corruption. But back to here, the civil calendar, in any country, the civil calendar is the calendar, or possibly one of several calendars used within that country for civil, official, or administrative purposes. The civil calendar is almost always used for general purposes by people and private organizations. The most widespread civil calendar and de facto international standard is the Gregorian calendar. Though the calendar is associated with the Catholic Church and the papacy, it has been adopted as a matter of convenience by many secular and non-Christian countries, although some countries use other calendars. Let me stop there. Understand what I'm saying. I've been telling you these detailed conditions, and I'm passing adoption. So you can adopt sustainable development in your policies to subvert your laws. and not have to have a treaty to do the same thing. You can adopt any child that's not yours and take care of it. It still doesn't make it yours. Still doesn't make it from your production. Doesn't make it from your work and endeavor. It's the obligation you take on. And isn't that what enfranchisement is? The civilization, the civilizing of somebody, someone into a body as a body, not a one. And so this calendar thing, as I said, the civil calendar is very important. Now let me tie you in, and I just want to touch this. I don't want to get too deep. It's very interesting if you go and find this out. And it's really a very incidental thing, actually, when you get into practice. But it does put your mind, as I told you, make your categories of exceptions to the existing structure, and you start to be able to peel yourself away. You can at least see the distinctions. Whether or not you can extricate yourself is maybe another thing, but you can at least see the distinctions here. And civil calendars are global. They're also church-oriented. Don't underestimate this adopted character. No different than sustainable development being adopted without a treaty, so is the calendar of the church. Why the Pope becomes so relevant. When you see the international documents that I'm so disappointed I didn't know to save and copy at the time I was doing my study, would show you the claim that's been made by the church that these adoptions are not incidental to your life. And why I focus on the Pope and the Vatican and all these other things as well. You start to see a connection. And the legal system. It's all tied together. It's a church. Don't underestimate the connection to the church. Remember, I think it was in around 1053, 1056. 1053 or 56. You go do the research. The king finally answered, okay, I've got all this official property, but where's my property? Where's the property the man possesses? Was a profound question to me. Because at the time they didn't understand the distinction when the king's stuff was not his stuff, the man, it was the stuff of the state. The king's, the office. And the man said, but I want something separate. Where did they turn? They turned to the church. The church had already established these offices, these jurisdictions, these things they'd rationalized, they'd legalized within the religious system to make exceptions within the generality. When I started to see this, I started to look at how really intelligent people, really manipulative people did things. And so I look at a lot of stuff going on. It's like we're jealous that they did it and we didn't figure it out. We haven't been told. So again, I don't point my finger too much. I look and say, okay, I got a lesson to learn here. So what did they establish in that time? The corporation soul. Very powerful to understand this. Let me go back to the civil calendar. So a civil calendar is rule of law around the globe, is having a civil calendar. Doesn't matter which one it is. You'll follow that one. When you do the state's business, you heard it in the last definition. The administration of the state goes through that civil calendar. What's a civil calendar? A list of lawsuit cases that are approaching trial in any court. Attorneys or parties understand that connection. Parties whose cases are coming to the top of the list receive notice of the calling of the civil calendar on the particular day for setting a trial date. Unfortunately, some courts are so clogged with pending lawsuits that one case may be called on several civil calendars, possibly months apart before being finally sent to trial. You're called on a civil calendar. The civil calendar is based on this Gregorian calendar made by Pope Gregory. Now, the parts of the civil calendar is if you can defeat the attachment on or about, understand, then maybe you have a discrepancy, the content and requirement in the citation or complaint of which is defeating the whole complaint. Not been tried, but it sits there to be done and understood. The calendar time, civil calendars, are their notice that you live in a civilized world. Civilized, an enfranchised world. You may think you're not part of it. They've made you part of it. It's been adopted and you've agreed because you haven't thrown it off. This thing is really simple. I keep repeating myself. I keep repeating myself. One more thing to understand that we've been told that we need to be cognizant of is how they integrate us with a system that we've been born into. I told you, again, the Silent Weapons, Quiet Wars, the manual on explaining to you if the society was an electrical circuit, they got a place for you. And they'll give you all the opportunity to plug in. Pretty simple, pretty cool. Pretty cool on being educated on how to be devious and get your way. All these sayings come flying to my mind, and I don't know them. I don't do them too well. Like I don't do jokes too well. What do they say? The best slave is the one who doesn't know that he is or she. Perfect. So, but my interest also so the civil calendar is very serious. We all overlook it, and I haven't really done much with it, but I know it sits there as one. If push come to shove and I had to do one more thing, I'd throw out this civil calendar issue, and I'd have to decide how I was going to explain that I wasn't part of that calendar, and that couldn't be put on me. I may have to build supposed religious belief. What it is you're building a jurisdiction that you're without the one that's imposing, and they can't make a legal connection internationally without causing a crime, them exposing them as being a criminal. And so as I look at, I'm looking at this way a lot. This is how I look at the world in a way, based on these officialnesses, these officialities. That I've always been interested in calendars and things like, how do we have a calendar? And I've always wondered about the moon and why, using the moon as a calendar because it's so regular, and the sun's pretty regular, except it's not, is it? It's not actually 365 days. It's got that little skosh of imperfection, doesn't it? Which I have to laugh at. If there's a creator out there, that was for us, folks. That was a little quarter of it, just to throw a little bit of turmoil in our life. It's not perfect. So it doesn't exist. There's no perfection in the world. Well, okay, so maybe it's the wrong thing to focus on. So I've been interested in this thing. How do you make a calendar actually that really works out? Well, it's been a big discussion. I've actually was fascinated by all the people all through histories. I say histories that have looked at how do you invent time and keep track of it, and for what? It ends up being mostly for civil state administration, how to plunder people. And so I've always, a long time ago, all I need to know when I'm in the land, all I need to know is how the land works. I need to be in touch with the land, and the moon's a pretty good one. The moon helps me out. The sun is a longer time scale that tells me seasons. The moon more tells me, if you understand this, the subtleties in nature, the things that science may not be able to address, that your very own eyes and senses, as limited as they are, can sense and pick up and observe. That I always thought a lunar calendar, moon calendar, was a better one, adjusting the amount of time in days to the full moon or new moon. Full moon's easier to see, so you want to do the full moon, not the new moon. My pea brain can't figure out darkness so well. So I've always thought a lunar moon would be fine, and then you move your months to adjust, so you have a more perfect timing structure in the year. So that's just a thought. So I wanted to find out, what are all these? We got a civil calendar that literally rules our lives that no one understands. But what other calendars that other societies have gone? And there's a whole list. I got a link so you can go to. There's a moon calendar, and then there's also a lunar calendar. Now, if you look in the Bible, you'll see two calendars. One's running solar time, and one's running lunar time. And so that's really fascinating too. And this is why I say, when you start looking at this book as an instruction manual instead of this club that gets beat on you a lot, and look through what appears to be intentional deceptions written into these things, when you go look at, actually sit down and contemplate the words that the English came from this, when you really start sitting down and understanding really the nature that this comes from, that book says a different thing. But you start realizing there's actually two calendars that are also running, and that's kind of interesting. Two different jurisdictions, two different belief systems within the same discussion. It's pretty cool when you start looking at it that way. Just more things to think about. But there's the moon calendar and the lunar calendar. I didn't know there was a difference, but there is. There's the Mayan calendar. Well, you heard about the destruction that was supposed to be, and you heard all these so-called modern people were claiming doom and misinterpreting it, as I covered that at the time, the turn of the millennia. The 2012, I think it was, their eon, I guess it was. We don't have a clue, folks. We're clueless. We're really we just make stuff up, right? Just make stuff up. We concoct all kinds of nonsense. And yet it's okay. And our calendars are based on this. But we have the Mayan calendar. That's what their society went on for. However it was, how marvelous it was. How did they chip all that rock like that, for folks? Maybe they didn't chip it. Maybe they knew about a better. Maybe they knew how to do vulcanry, like cement. That wasn't cement. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't chipped away rock. Maybe it was poured in place. Who knows? It's fascinating what we don't know and what more accessible answers are. So we have the Mayan calendar, lunar calendar, the Disney calendar, the conception calendar, the Chinese calendar, the calendar of events, the baby calendar, the Aztec calendar. This will sound like the Christmas greeting, the Malayalam calendar, the Hindu calendar, the Islamic calendar, on and on and on. And more, the fiscal calendar, the online calendar, the Yahoo calendar. And then I started picking up on something, and I found this fascinating. So I was looking for a more perfect calendar, and I thought I was going to find it in the moon calendars, but you don't. There's adulterations in that calendar too. So there's no perfect timing in calendars. And I started looking at all the calendars, and I started noticing I was focusing more on maybe a more natural truth in my life, or for my life, in my experience. I started realizing there's things like ovulation calendars, baby calendars. There's actually a Hooters calendar. And I realized I started focusing on the fact that our society, though it speaks in male, is really driven by the female, isn't it? And how maybe there's a different calendar altogether we might need to be picked on, that all seem to focus on how we got here and how we're going to continue to go, notwithstanding all of our hate amongst each other. But the Hooters calendar did get my attention. Look at the moon, look at the lunar, but the Hooters calendar did get my attention. I didn't even know there was actually a special calendar. But it was really consistent with the misdiagnosis of what runs the world actually in the natural sense, which really does seem to be the female. Since 1986, the Hooters calendar is hitting the populace as a best-selling calendar of this kind. The calendar is covered with photos of the world-famous Hooters girl around the world. In addition to those calendars, the calendar displays different jokes and funny graphic items. The remarkable difference. So I had never understood this. It's fascinating, and it really started to make this as more relevant, really, than the moon calendar, the lunar calendar, or any other calendar. This has a remarkable difference. There are actually can adjust to the way we see nature. There are several remarkable, yes, that way too. There are several remarkable differences out there if we compare Hooters calendars to the common one. Firstly, the Hooters calendar cannot serve as a common calendar. Wow, folks, there's the answer first for how you go and defeat civil jurisdiction, isn't it? The civil calendar has to be a general calendar. This one can't be. I'm already embracing the Hooters calendar. I've never seen one. Didn't even cross my mind until I saw it in the list here. The Hooters calendar cannot serve as a common calendar. I'm showing you how you identify how you're outlaw. If it can't be a common calendar, it can't be a civil calendar. If you live by the Hooters calendar, you live outside of the law, the civil law, the civil legal. Most of the days of the Hooters calendar are filled with photos of Hooters girls and jokes. Secondarily, the months are not in order as well. The ordering of the months in the calendar is really unique and out of the crowd. Here, as a viewer wants to find out the desired month, he or she needs to start searching from the very beginning of the calendar. The idea behind this type of ordering, according to the project director Doug Vollmer, is nothing but to make the viewer see all the girls and jokes once again for each of the time. That means a viewer has to view the same pictures and write-ups again and again for each of the months. It sounds quite monotonous, but in practice, and that floored me that people would actually continue to practice this. In practice, the case is found quite worthy considering the popularity since last 2 decades. Well, that sounds like popularity in last 2 decades sounds like a coming common calendar, which cannot be a common calendar. And for the standpoint of a civil calendar attached to you, if you embrace the Hooter, you embrace immortality. And I think I've now abandoned the moon for the Hooter. Sometimes you just got to step up, folks. You got to do what the Hammond Bundy thing is up there in Burns. Burns going to be burning, I can just tell you. It's not cool. But sometimes you got to step up and you got to be that man. And I've got a story. A report, a video. I'm going to read from the video. It's from RT. Happened a little while ago. Sometimes you have to make that hard decision. And you do have to bring a gun in. But you know, that's the tough one. But in this case he does. Cost of doctors' mistakes. Again, this is notice of what we're facing anymore in the mediocrity the current Middle Ages becomes. Cost of doctors' mistakes, folks. The medical profession, knowing better than you, is incompetent. It has its limit, and you have to know where that is, but to stop it, it's gone such a foothold of expertise. Experts say that they have been given license to kill you, which is why they have a license. Doctor's mistakes. Father jailed after armed standoff to save his son. 27-year-old American suffered a massive stroke. Doctors declare him brain dead and approve taking him off life support. Obamacare, folks, listen to this. Keep up. His desperate father took a gun and threatened staff to save his son's life. Went to the hospital, went to the room, and didn't really threaten the hospital staff. They just wanted to, he was just protecting his son from them pulling the plug. Shortly after that night, the patient came out of the coma and made a full recovery. However, his father was sentenced to 10 months for the incident. You get the video, you get the story. This gentleman had to go to the hospital, gun in hand, and protect his son from a plug being pulled from a coma. The miracle seems to me of which, and maybe not so much a miracle because the kid in a coma was right there. Right there, he just needed to have some incentive to squeeze the guy's finger while the father's there. After the doctors have found no activity, the son squeezes the father's hand to let him know, I'm still here. That's when the standoff was eliminated, when he could say and tell them that the son was not dead and was still there. He squeezed his father's finger. The SWAT team that was called in apparently had their own doctors, which looked at the son and found that to be the case. So this gentleman has to go in and suffer a potential SWAT team execution to save his son against the system. And he does. That's a hero. That's standing up. And that's not doing it with the ability to have the right ability to make a record. When his observation was the government, the city, the hospital, the doctors were moving too fast. And you know, there's always in the back of my mind, wonder if he had an anatomical donation card, and even if he didn't, how would the father know the body's got the organs taken out? There's big money in organs. But they wanted this young, strong guy for parts. Parts is parts. Don't know that, folks. Why would they pull the plug? Why wouldn't they wait a little bit longer? But you're looking at a lot here. You're looking at what it's going to take to stand up. You're looking at when maybe when it's proper to bring that gun. You're looking at having to really think about this decision when you do that, and the certainty. And then you want to talk about an injustice. This is a real injustice, not the Hammonds, where they may have actually provoked a fire to go off their land onto the BLM land, which they had no right to do, which is why I say be careful. This is a convoluted case. Even in state law, they would have had to pay, and maybe it wouldn't have been criminal, but they'd have had to pay some kind of damages. That may be the other injustice. But in this case, this gentleman serves sentenced to 10 months. I don't know what served, but sentenced by the story. That is an injustice. So you have now you're looking at another problem in this story, and this is partly what I want to say. The system is now taking advantage The right of allocution would have come in here for this gentleman and said, notwithstanding your sentence, I was duty-bound to not allow murder to happen under the license. That you can't send me, your sentence does not attach. It's the right of allocution. Have you ever heard it, folks? Those of you that have, you know what I'm talking about here. Those that you haven't, you have to go learn it. It's one of your rights. It's where you say, notwithstanding your view that I made a criminal act, a conduct, you can't impose sentence. I did the moral thing, and you don't have jurisdiction to judge me on that. How's that one, folks? Can you get that word in your mouth? Most of us won't be in this condition. I think more of us will be, but you're not going to do it coming out of the burns this way, but this guy can. But this guy wasn't afforded that in the judge, which shows you the reflexive nature of the state's imposition for future control of your behavior. They want you to have the question in your mind that doing this is a criminal act. And that's the crime. I think I've said enough there. I want to say more, but I won't. I think you get this thing. I think you do inside, internally, intuitionally, if nothing else. We just have to have a better awareness, and we can address this authorita. And that authorita is willing to kill you and then penalize you for stopping the murder. We're living in that day, folks. And my frustration, we talked a little bit about in the UCY chat, that's a frustration of mine. We have a lot of interested people that, in my opinion, I guess it is my opinion, but it seems to be fact. It seems to be wheels on the ground, boots to the ground fact. A lot of interested people do the wrong thing. Why the crickets, folks? We can be busy work, or we can do what we need to do. And I'm not the one to determine that for anybody. Every one of you will find something, I'm sure. We're even talking about people, I'll just say as myself, I don't get out much. A lot of you that I talk with don't either. We can play our part. I do. Just find that part. Doesn't mean I don't get out. I just don't. I'm not the tip of a spear that way. I give the government the shaft for the tip of the spear that goes and wields what I provide to the tip. You can too if you're not getting out much. So, and I know I'm not talking to one chatter in particular. This is just general discussion. We just find a place, folks. And there's nothing I can do to make that decision. But we have to provide. We have to kind of approach it in a better way. At least the way I've seen it. What I've been doing for 10 years directly really has shown me a lot of that. We got a lot of interested people. They're just running around like they're chickens with the head cut off, and they don't want to settle down and really listen. They'd rather, for someone like myself, they'd rather challenge me. They'd rather argue with me, and that just shows me they're not really paying attention, and they don't really want to fix anything. They just want to be the one that pretends. The pretenders. Look at me. Look at what I'm doing to fight for your rights, and they're not. They make issues where nothing exists. And there's a recurring one. I'll move on as I go into these issues that maybe don't exist. Obama set to declare new limits on some Second Amendment rights is now hitting the alternative media waves. Obama bans bullets of America's top-selling rifle through executive action. They're talking about the same thing last year that they did this year right now at almost the same time as they did last year. Why do we do this to ourselves in our alternative views in our blogosphere? We talked about last year about these executive actions can only extend as far as the Congress has allowed it. And as I show you and explain behind the woodshed how that happens, you understand now you can interject into that and integrate against the problem. That we don't have to be fear-mongering about all this issue. It may very well be that executive action tries to get rid of a piece of ammunition. But that's an executive function that has to be what? It has to go through an administration, which is the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Department. They have to make a rule, don't they? What did last week we told you? I told you about Jonathan Corbett. He's doing his action against the TSA for what? Administrative rule failure, Administrative Procedures Act. This whole week, Obama stories on and on. Obama plans to executive action threatens top-selling AR-15 rifle. Instead of fretting, we put everybody on notice on what they're supposed to think about when they go approach the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, or send notices to Obama. One thing for sure is the ammunition can only go for firearms. And that's another thing. We make, again, as I said, we make issues out of nothing. Things that are not issues. When they made the rules in an executive action, you found out what all they can do is they monitored, they improved, they collated, they took data, they set out advisories. Nothing substantial came out of that. And yet again, like clockwork, it comes out. They're going to take your ammunition to fire everybody up. I think this is really, I told you, this is just they're just stimulating GDP, it seems to me. But let's say that Obama goes after, I think it's the 5.56 AR-15 chambered round. I think that's whatever, the armor piercing. He wants to go after that particular one. Why don't I see people stepping up and say, okay, good, let's organize up and go after it, if that's what he thinks he's going to do. Let's mobilize to proper action. We go after we organize ourselves, and some of us go after the ATF for the rulemaking problems. We go after the so-called president, the unqualified one. I haven't used that for a long time. It's like, oh, he's going out. He's old news. He's a quacking lame duck. It doesn't matter. But here he is, making his chicken scratch on executive actions that only apply to the executive department, don't they? And yet everybody's going to capitulate that he has the authority to do this, at least by the fervor I see that it's noise. It shouldn't have even hit our radar here unless it was a call to action and exactly what to do. And part of which would be to go after the ATF on the failure to make the rule by the law. The Obama not having a right to come and extend out. You go ahead and cause that to be a question. Why? You just send him, what was your authority to go outside the discretion? Ask him. Send him a letter. An underqualified one. Where the law constrained you to this, how did you have the right to do? Where do you say you have the right to that? You're establishing a record and standing, aren't you? You bring that forth at the administrative side as well. So you get all fired up about all this ammunition. You aren't going to use it anyway, folks. You aren't going to use it. You're going to watch if it goes down, if it burns over there in Oregon, you're going to watch how not to do it. I'm surely hoping that it doesn't go. I'm hoping beyond hope right now. This is like all the other ones. This is like standing at the edge of the Bundys, like a sugar pine mine. All the people doing it wrong, and the government taking advantage of it. You're going to have a word in your mouth about that particular executive action if it happens, instead of fretting. Your national organizations are not as powerful as you coming with the right about your right. And here's one thing that I find that people don't really address. That you have the right to any ammunition that you can fire. Why? Because the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. And you have the right to defend yourself, what? For hunting? Or was it against an oppressive government? That they don't have the right to dictate to you what you use in your weapon in protection of yourself against them. Why doesn't that make the list? Why does everybody fear and fret over these things? Why did I see a bunch of this nonsense all the time? And yet, it's, again, crickets is what we see. That's who we are as a people anymore. We're not men, and women even. Women have to stand up for them. They're the mama bear ultimately. If we fail as men, the woman stands up. Notice the man went down to protect his son. Not to degrade the woman. The woman's home probably protecting her house. Now the man has to go out and protect his son against the state and their license. When are we going to start to act more appropriately and then do that thing we need to do when we have to? When do we get the intelligence in us to make that proper decision? That I see all this noise and this fear-mongering is just divisive. It brings up lots of issues that don't actually exist. And thanks to Gary L. bringing up a story, he tied together a statute. He brings up a story, got back a few weeks ago now, I think it is. Minnesota man sentenced to 5 years in prison for illegal possession of a BB gun. Minnesota Supreme Court has decided to hear the appeal of a man with a controlled substance related felony on his record who was sentenced to 5 years in prison for illegal possession of a firearm when he was found in possession of a BB gun. Why this is even a question is showing you the corruption of the system. There is no justice. As Gary also provided, and thank you for doing that, he provides the definition for firearm. I've talked to you about this over and over. We talked about the Dick Act. Not the Richard Cheney Act. No, this was a 1902 Act. Everybody misinterprets that as well. Notwithstanding all that, there's laws about a lot of this. What is a firearm? You'll see the news talk about BB guns and the right to bear arms and assault rifles. What is a firearm? The Congress has decided what it is. The states, in that capacity, have to follow that definition. Why Minnesota hasn't decided this before, it had to get to the Supreme Court in the right way, is beyond me, and only examples the injustice of that system, which the people should step up and stop. Crickets on that too. We focus, apparently, well, we're I don't know why, we focus on the wrong thing. We focus, it's like what is it? Is it a dog or a cat? Is it the dog that follows your finger or the cat? When you point to something, they actually follow your finger instead of looking where you point. I think the dog actually looks where you're pointing and the cat follows your finger. That's what we do. We don't look where we need to go. We look at what we're directed, what the director says. And that's the end of someone's finger pointing where we're supposed to pay attention, instead of looking at the substance and materially affecting that action. A firearm, folks, I'm going to read it. Under Title 26, United States Code Annotated are the amended code as common law dictates it should be interpreted. Common law being the judge's opinions. 26 USCA 861. A. Firearms is defined as a shotgun or rifle having a barrel of less than 18 inches in length, or any other weapon except a pistol or revolver from which a shot is discharged from an explosive if such weapon is capable of being concealed on the person, or a machine gun, and includes a muffler or silencer for any firearm, whether or not such firearm is included within the foregoing definitions. The law involving firearms, listen very carefully, firearms is what we're talking about. That's the term, the subject matter term. Don't throw any other term in your mind. Don't try to think they're talking about anything else. Don't try to put in there what you think it is. Put in there what their jurisdiction's talking to and what it's about. They talk about a firearm. If you don't see the word firearm, don't make it up. If you see the word firearm, only apply this definition and its interpretation. Period. Why a BB gun does not fulfill the first one to be considered a firearm under even state law, because Congress has determined what a firearm is and has been given the power to regulate commerce among the states for that term. Where it defines that term, the states have to follow. Why? You want to keep consistency. That's what the whole point of regulation is about. The law involving firearms governs the registration of any weapon which will or is designed to or be made readily. The law involving firearms concerns the registration of any weapon which will or is designed to or may readily be converted to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive. The frame or receiver of such a weapon, any frame, muffler, or firearm muffler or firearm silencer, or any destructive device. Title 26 of 5861D makes it a federal crime or offense for anyone to possess a certain kinds of firearms which are not registered to him in the National Firearm Registration and Transfer Act. The law governing who may own firearms, such as prohibiting felons to carry guns, children's access to firearms here, not guns, not your right to bear, not assault rifles, but firearms, these things defined in 861. Record keeping, transport, and licensing of those dealing in firearms. Federal law makes it unlawful for any person except a licensed dealer to engage in the business of dealing in firearms. Some states are also adopted dealer regulation. That's interesting because that's adoption of the federal standard. Can they rewrite the firearm definition? No. So, Wisconsin or Minnesota can't change the fact that the BB gun's not a firearm, which is that rifle that's of a shortened length or a machine gun, a silencer, or anything that does that, is that configuration. Federal law does not regulate the carrying of concealed weapons. It does, however, provide that persons who have been issued state permits to purchase and possess firearms are exempt from background checks if those permits were issued, one, within the previous 5 years in the state in which the transfer is to take place, and after an authorized government official verified the possession of the firearm would not be unlawful. Now, why do they have to have a verified signature? Isn't that the presumption of guilt where you have a right to bear? States may adopt laws requiring background checks under such circumstances. However, most states allowing the carry of concealed weapons are by persons who obtain a permit. It goes on and on. Point is, when you look at what the definition of firearm, that answers the Supreme Court case. Why did it go to the Supreme Court when firearm is imposed? The definition is imposed on the states. This becomes news. And it becomes a system in the justice system. Remember, they're promoting that justice is required. This is just a delay of justice because this should have been answered as soon as the indictment hit. The judge should have killed the indictment when he found out it was a BB gun and not a firearm. So the judge is involved. This is all about that knot tied in the barrel of the pistol in front of the UN Plaza. That we make issues out of things, and if this is an avoidance here that you can do if you were to understand this. But the firearm ammunition they're talking about isn't for an AR-15. And you see the very narrow limitation about this having to do with commerce as well. That if you understand these things, you list them out short and sweet, and you say the government had no right to go outside of this constraint, to interfere with my right to take any ammunition I need to be prepared in case I have to decide with the rest of the people that we have to defend ourselves from the state itself. No, it's not about hunting. Thank you very much. I don't even like talking about that because, I told you, if we have to go to the Second Amendment, we've lost. We've lost. It's not about the fight. It's about not about being white, getting the whoop ass opened on us. It's about that we've lost as a people. That we couldn't figure out better than to go take arms and take over a building. It's irrelevant to the whole point. Why are we doing this? Why is it even a point? We're talking about now a firearm is a very particular thing in law. That we also heard that the Virginia was going to not allow these permits that they're allowed to them to do for concealed. That the Virginia was saying, well, you didn't come up to our standards, so all external states we're not going to do any reciprocity if you don't match our rule. Notwithstanding, the Constitution says you have to give full faith and credit to those laws and rules in other states. That that's good enough for them, it's okay for us. That we even have to come up and waste time in our government, the legislature, now to read this story that the Virginia GOP to undo AG's anti-gun policy with a national reciprocity legislation. Wow, national reciprocity legislation. You understand what they're doing. They take these issues and they make it so they can make it a blanket control, but understand and never forget it's over a limited thing. It's over that thing, that firearm defined, over which Congress does have regulation authority in commerce. And we sit and back and listen to all this stuff, and we think it's about gun rights, and we think it's about stopping, banning, and all this. There's no authority for any of it. We're just letting that noise ride over what the law requires. That we waste time in our legislatures to go against policies made by executive branch people that are in the Bar Association, and these people are also Bar Association, and you see them attaching a national structure over the top of it, shows you that eventually they're going to get this nation underneath the cover and control of the international impositions. They're going to adopt their way in, and they have every authority to do so. This is the international occupier law. You have the right to sneak yourself in, take over silently, and change the laws over time. If an occupier does that, it's lawful internationally. I've identified for you over the years many occupations that the United States is suffering. And I say suffering because that means that you're living with it. Oh, I suffered this and I suffered that. Well, stop it. That's your duty. You're the republic if you could keep it. As I've explained to you, the license that the plunderer gave itself at the origination of the United States of America, and no one paid attention to that. Maybe some did. I mean, what was it, Patrick Henry? I smell a rat? Yeah, okay, maybe some did. But no force and effect in the people. They're just happy to get what they got. You know, we really do just want to live in peace. This country was set up to be able to do that. But it was also set against. So, why these are issues and taking up our time fascinates me at one level. It frustrates me another. And then the crickets I'm speechless, folks. I go to crickets there. I go to silence too at some point. I don't know what more to do about it. I'm here once a week. During the week, I'm doing what I can do. And this last week sure flew by. I was blown away how fast it went. Just doing what we can do, and we're back to Sunday. And we see progress. We see things. We see the wheels coming off their machine, folks. And I'm stuttering. We have it in our hands to stop almost relatively short timing, and we won't even do that much for ourselves. And you think going to guns is going to do it? Please stop. Don't hurt me. And don't hurt me. I wrote this a long time ago. If you are drunk enough to let these guys in, intoxicated on your freedom, why do you think you're going to be able to deal with them when you find out that you're intoxicated in your freedom and you tried to solve yourself with a gun? Who's going to get hurt? Who's going to get hurt? In our face, we see the license government gives itself as the occupier, not the government now, as I've identified for you in a number of places. When the government does things to support itself and give itself security, it proclaims martial law. How many times have I said that, and where have I told you to read it? For those of you who haven't heard, those of you newly tuning in, thank you very much. Those of you that keep tuning in, thank you. I hope it really does help. I hope you are going to the blogcaster and getting some of this stuff to kind of mull over what I'm saying. It does take a bit to think, but when the government is serving itself by theft, by fines, by fees, by taxes, by your civil rights, folks. This is so... I'm sorry, just laugh. 1868, folks, they've been doing this to us. They made it official. That in the Lieber Code it says... Now remember, the Lieber Code's been tossed out, but that's okay. We can use it as a guide. Like I say, use the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Use it as a guide, a human guide to foibles and frailties. Use the Silent Weapons of Quiet Wars of your place in the society they made for you, to technocracy in action. The technocrats working you into the system, you adopting their ways and agreeing to it. When the Lieber Code gave us a guideline and when it is we can know, if we didn't know how to figure it out before, when you know you're in martial law, is they don't have to proclaim it, and you know them by what they did, what they doing to you. Their actions, their deeds. Talk about in deeds. I keep talking about these deeds I keep taking from, putting you under. Your tenancies instead of your patents. You know them when you're underneath this, folks. The entire Florida Police Department busted, laundering tens of millions of international drug cartels. Mafia organization or a police department? Hard to tell. I'm not going to read more. I think it's actually Grammy Mary covered this as well. If I heard that part coming in and going out, I think she might have covered it. It doesn't matter. It's here in the news to let you know. This is notice. That these people will make up every kind of excuse to steal from you and make internal organized criminal business within their syndicated state. These are martial law proclamations in their actions. These people were doing money laundering through drug cartels. Another indication the drug war is being used to exploit and plunder. And this awareness is coming, folks. More and more people are coming to the idea that these wars that we're on, you don't think they're important. These make emergencies in your life that the government takes license under. These wars were all false flags. They're all tools of plunder. They declare the occupier in your own land. They've come in and they've eaten you out from the inside, like any good parasite would. And it was all lawful, now arguably. I've written about this a long time, but arguably the states were taken over internally. The permanent laws of the people were substituted for the Model Corporation Business Act. That was arguably done lawfully. Because we don't know who's going to make that decision, do we? It's not ours anymore. We weren't vigilant and diligent to keep it, folks. And they used that as a license to take it. International law says until we're conquered, it's our obligation, and we have the authority to go back and get it. The Second Amendment doesn't require that we use arms. Whether they be the firearms the government hates or not. When I talk about terms being specific to jurisdictions, I'm not messing around. Don't underestimate this thing. When I tell you the civil calendar means something, you're under civil, you're enfranchised. No matter how you deny it, you are treated under it. And if you don't throw it off, it occupies you. That's just common occupation law and international law. It's nothing real hard to figure out about this. You live in a society in the United States, the open-air prison. People are seeing it, finally. You live in a place where the police departments survive on the policing for profit. That's martial law. I've told you this over and over. Here's a whole people in Florida, they're going all over the country to make deals to launder drug money. They finally got caught. Well, I don't know. Okay, fine, great. Should have never been happening. They should have never thought about that. And where did our scruples go in the beginning to even allow that? But there it is. And it was allowed. Maybe the excess is what caught them, which means that there's going to be less than excess that's acceptable. As I've talked to you about that in the context of an occupying force and its soldiers, and what it really takes to take out one of their soldiers. Why you don't see the prosecutions coming down for what, if you and I did it, would be hung to the neck until dead. Given great license to harm you without any accountability. Horrifying video shows cops sick canine on infant daughter as a man they mistook for a suspect. Not fear-mongering, folks. I know people want to say that. Not about me, maybe generally, but about hosts fear-mongering. I'm telling you, this is notice of what you can expect. I've told you about this condition coming a long time ago. There is no accountability. You're not requiring accountability. You're not forcing past the reticence to have these agencies become accountable because they are the occupying force. That's not a notice to you enough either. But you are not pushing through to stop this kind of nonsense where they stop someone who's suspected but not the guy they want, and they won't even have the respect, and they don't have the decency and the empathy and the care to treat you with any dignity, even when you're holding your baby, to show you. And they do use tools that are wild. They use this wild beast to attack the cop didn't sick him on the baby, but that's where the missile went. This is your reality, and until you figure this out as reality and not fearing, but this is what you may walk into one day, or someone you know. Until you step up to that reality and realize that someone's going to have to deal with this. One of us is going to have to do this, or it's not going away. This is our future. In a way, I'm shocked. Going from my little innocent pea brain, how we were told, everything was going to be great and you can get what you want in the world, just work hard for it. That's all the slavers' propaganda. But it doesn't matter. We thought it was good. And I've told you, we've worked everything since 33 on a promise, so none of us are immune from this. We got our part to play in it too. But that it's come on like this in my lifetime is really a bit of a shock. That people have such disrespect for other people. It's just not in me, folks. I guess that's the shock. I said, peace on earth. Where the heck did it go? Why isn't it that way? Why are we allowing this? That your little one gets attacked by a dog, and you're not even the subject. It's not even you. The little one gets attacked because you are been disrespected. The comment in the story is That's not him, dude, talking to the cop. That's not him. That's not a black man in a black shirt. Another officer tells the first with the dog. That's not him, dude. Release the dog. Chew up the kid. This is your future. This is your reality now. It's not your future. It's happening now. This nonsense, this disrespect, this indignity in the minimum, this crime against us. I don't know, I'm going to just repeat myself over and over. This just cannot be good enough. This can't be okay with people. And I know it's not, but I'm not talking about, shaking our head. I'm talking about somebody has to go there and as I say, go after their policies. It is administrative. Just admit it to it and go after it. If you understand more legalistic things, go after that. Make declarations. Find a way. Find the way out for yourself. Get yourself armored up as you do the experience. Don't try to walk in. Don't try to walk in naked to it all. You can build up the armor. You need to joust a little bit before you step into the full-fledged. But you can do that. There's lots of ways. That's why I say making records are a really cool way to get into the condition. You'll see how they respond. You'll see how to spar. You'll spar with them administratively, and you'll be able to constrain them that way. And you'll see what the game's going in when it really becomes where the rubber does have to meet the road. You're in a position to show the public record to the rest of the prairie dogs what's going on, actually. Now, this next report, talk about horrifying. Literally, for me, I could not believe what I was reading. All I can say is I'm getting to the end, and I've already kind of got the end of the novel. As I'm reading through, I'm realizing what this is a notice to us about. Breaking story here just a couple of days ago or a day ago. All I found myself mouthing or saying under my breath was, wow, wow, wow. And my mind's racing at 1,000 miles an hour, putting it all together about what they're telling us here. That I'm stuttering just thinking about it. Wow. What this is talking about, explaining what they're doing, in my mind, what they're doing to us through discussing ants, is to me a real eye-opener for anybody who really can just put the dots together. Team reprograms, really horrifying thought of what they're actually doing this for. And what was really horrifying, you can't be in my mind, but what you don't probably hear, but I'll explain a little bit, is I'm putting together the story of where the actual target is that they're after, and it comes up at the end of the story what they're after through what they're talking about. That was exactly what I was figuring the horror is in this. That I'm sure anybody who's been around understands when I'll read some of this. In fact, I'm going to read probably a lot of it. It tells you. A team reprograms, listen folks, team reprograms social behavior in carpenter ants using epigenetic drugs. What is Agenda 2030, Agenda 21, Sustainable Development? What's this global governance condition about? The technocratic future, the silent weapons of quiet wars place in society for you plug into. Or in this case, they plug you into without your notice. But social behavior. That's what social justice is. It's one of the legs of that three-legged stool. They now had to genetically engineer to have 5 and 6 legs because they found out the legs are a little bit puny when everyone else starts to see what's going on. Social behavior is now reprogrammable in ants. And I read that and I said, they're not talking to us about ants. And I've just given you the punchline in a way. They're talking about telling us about how they're doing it to us, or they can do it. Let's put it in that context, and I'm just going to tell you as I read through this, you'll see they're telling us they're doing it. What they're also telling us when you get to it, and they make a phrase, and I keyed right on this phrase, they keyed right on what they really were after, that is the key for why they were even doing the study, and what's so important about it. In Florida, carpenter ants and ant colonies distinct worker castes called minors and majors exhibit pronounced differences in social behavior throughout their lives. In a new study published today in Science, a multi-institution team anchored at University of Pennsylvania found that these caste-specific behaviors are not set in stone. That alone should be horrifying. That it's in Pennsylvania and Sandusky and all that thing, that's another whole other thing. But let's stay up on point, because this is horrifying enough. Rather, this pioneering study shows that social behavior can be reprogrammed, indicating that an individual's epigenetic, not genetic, makeup determines behavior in ant colonies. Epigenetics is the study of stable or persistent changes in gene expression that occur without changes in DNA sequence. Epigenetic regulation has been observed to affect a variety of distinct traits in animals, including body size, aging, and behavior. Let me just stop here for a second. Remember, they're talking about using genetics to make humans, remember the animals, humans, more the future we want and more socially, behaviorally adjusted and more climate sensitive carbon creation units. That they decided if they make smaller humans, that would be more consistent with what Gaia needs. Don't underestimate the statement that they're exposing to you here, that size was something that they know controlling the epigenetic environment in the behavior of the organism, of its size, of its age, becomes very important in the disclosure that they're telling us here. However, there is an enormous gap in knowledge about the epigenetic mechanisms that regulate social behavior. Ants provide ideal models to study social behavior because each colony is comprised of thousands of individual sisters. Famously, the queen and all workers are female with nearly identical genetic makeup, much like human twins. Human twins. Let me go back and just kick another thought here. Sisters. Think about soy protein. That soy emasculates males and puts female characteristics on males to adjust their sisterhood, I would say, maybe already in place. However, these sisters possess stereotypically distinct physical traits and behaviors based on caste. In a previous study, the authors created the first genome-wide epigenetic maps in ants. This revealed the epigenetic regulation is key to distinguishing majors as the brawny soldiers of carpenter ant colonies compared to the minors, their smaller, brainier sisters. Major ants have large heads and powerful mandibles that help to defeat enemies and process and transport large food items. Minor ants, not minor, as in smaller, diminutive, minor ants are much smaller, outnumber majors 2-to-1. I think around here it's 5-to-1, but anyway, 2-to-1, and assume the important responsibility of searching for food and recruiting other ants to help with the harvest. Recruiting others to help with the harvest. Oh man, this thing really is rich. Compared to majors, these foraging minors have genes involved in brain development and neurotransmission that are overexpressed. Compared to majors, these foraging minors have genes involved in brain development and neurotransmission that are overexpressed. In new findings, the interdisciplinary research team led by senior author Shelley Berger, Ph.D., from the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, in collaboration with teams led by Jürgen Liebig from Arizona State University and Denny Reinberg from New York University found the caste-specific foraging behavior can be directly altered by changing the balance of epigenetic chemicals called acetyl groups attached to histone proteins complexes around which the DNA strands are wrapped in a cell nucleus. To reveal this exquisite control, the team demonstrated that foraging behavior could be reprogrammed using compounds that inhibit the addition of or removal of these acetyl groups in histones, or histone acetylation, in turn changing the expression of nearby genes. Now, at this point, I'm thinking, how marvelous that we can do all that. This really is marvelous. But I'm still horrified at what they're explaining to us here. What they are studying. How'd they even get here to know to be here? And it starts to develop as we start now reading into why they're after this social behavior thing. Berger and Daniel S. Och, a university professor in the Department of Cell and Development Biology and Genetics. She is also a director of the Penn Epigenetics program. There's a whole program for this, getting lots of money, I'm sure. I didn't research the fee, see where the money sources were, but this is a study sequence. This is something that they're really, really interested in. And if you understand how these academia was created, this is special interest behind the scenes. It really should terrify you what they're actually telling us here. Quote, the results suggest that behavioral malleability in ants and likely other animals may be regulated in an epigenetic manner via histone modification, close quote. Now we're starting to, they keep talking about ants, now we're going to focus a little bit more on those other animals. It's all about the histone. I'll spell it, maybe I'm pronouncing it wrong. Histone. The almost decade-long collaboration blends the molecular biology with observations of animal behavior to understand how caste-based differences arise in ants. Ants, as well as termites, and some bees and wasps, are eusocial, or truly social species. Previous work suggested that histone acetylation could create dramatic differences in gene expression between identical individuals, contributing to physical differences in body size and reproductive abilities between ant castes. The current study expands on its narrative by showing the caste behaviors are also regulated by epigenetic changes in histone acetylation. Understand what they're saying here. They're saying that your environment changes how your genes are being transcribed. Real time. Well, real time in time. Not as established by the DNA code that creates the originating creature, such that it is. To do so, the team used the fact that chromatin structure, the coiling of the DNA around the histone proteins, can be altered by the addition of acetyl groups, which ultimately changes the compaction of the genome. Modifications like histone acetylation allows DNA to uncoil, whereas others cause DNA to become tightly compact and inaccessible to the proteins that regulate gene expression. I keep track a little bit about that because there's some more things that they talk about and what these chemicals can do to adjust that. Knowing that histone modification are used to establish specific features of different tissues within an individual led the team to ask whether histone modification might also be used to create differences in traits like social behavior between individuals, notably the brawny majors and the brainy minors. And understand too the size, and then you think about brawny majors and think of soldiers in the future. In the science paper, the team fed foraging miners a chemical inhibitor that prevents cells from removing acetyl groups from histones. This treatment enhanced foraging and scouting for food, and correspondingly led to increased histone acetylation near genes involved in neuronal activity. Conversely, inhibiting the addition of acetyl groups led to the decreased foraging activity. In contrast, the dramatic boost in foraging seen in minors feeding mature major workers these inhibitors caused little to no increase in foraging. Here it comes, folks. Here comes the creepiness. And you should know where to target this one. Here it comes. However, the team found that directly injecting these epigenetic inhibitors into the brains of very young majors immediately increased foraging, reaching levels normally only observed in minors. Additionally, a single treatment with these inhibitors was sufficient to induce a sustained minor-like foraging in the majors for up to 50 days. Booster shot, anybody? Wow. Like I say, wow, folks. I just get reading this, and I just, wow. These results suggest, and here it is. Here's where it just kind of clicked for me. The penny really dropped in this whole article. I hope for you too. Hope you run to the end in your mind and know where we're going with this. These results suggest that there is an epigenic window of vulnerability. An epigenic window of vulnerability in young ant brains, which confers increased susceptibility to environmental manipulations, such as with histone-modifying inhibitors. Berger observes that all of the genes known to the major epigenetic regulators in mammals are also present in ants, which makes ants, quote, a fantastic model for studying principles of epigenetic modulation of behavior and even longevity, because queens have a much longer lifespan compared to majors and minor workers, because of the remarkable window we have uncovered. Ants also provide an extraordinary opportunity to explore and understand the epigenic process that come into play to establish behavioral patterns at a young age. This is a topic of increasing research interest in humans, owing to the growing prevalence of behavioral disorders and diseases and the appreciation that diet may influence behavior. You want some more GMO food, folks? You want to take another booster shot? How about that originating vaccine? Behavioral disorders because of epigenetic modification. I'm speechless again, folks. Wow. Wow, I'm sitting here, wow. I've read this before and I'm still sitting here, wow. This is a topic of increasing research interest in humans. On the researchers about humans, these little animals. Owing to the growing prevalence of behavioral disorders and diseases and the appreciation that diet may influence behavior, you know some biopharma's behind here paying for this, finding out what they're doing. If this isn't an indictment for the increased occurrence, the prevalence of what they assume is ADHD and all these other and these diseases that we see, I really don't know what to tell you more, folks. This is the thing I say, if you're going to talk about a precautionary principle, we should have done it a long time ago. We just don't know. But they're actually studying that there's a fact behind the epigenic behavioral control mechanisms, of which they're looking particularly for that point of extreme vulnerability. What kind of psychopaths are these? But broader implications now. Let's go see. Are we right? Are we going down that path? Is this where they're focused? Are they now going off of ants onto where this study really goes? I think so. One important gene implicated in the ant study is a CBP, which is an epigenetic writer, WRITER, writer enzyme that alters chromatin by adding acetyl group to histones. And when I saw the term enzyme here, folks, it really made the day. Enzymes are like these catalyst machines. They're the constructors. This is a pivotal point right here in what they've found, how this works. Dealing in enzymes is a very powerful place. And what is that CBP? It is the Krebs binding protein, CBP. Krebs binding protein. What's a Krebs? C-R-E-B. It goes on and on. These are pretty technical. You have to keep going on. Krebs is a cellular transcription factor. It binds to certain DNA sequences called CAMPs, response elements, thereby increasing or decreasing the transcription of downstream genes. It defines what will be transcribed and how. This is the mechanism of the CBP. This is the core of this system that they're messing with. This is something that you really, really have to pay attention to. CBP has already been implicated as a critical enzyme facilitating learning and memory in mice and is mutated in certain human cognitive disorders, notably Rumstein-Taybi syndrome. Hence, the team's findings suggest that CBP-mediated histone acetylation may also facilitate complex social interactions found in vertebrate species. The authors suspect that CBP's role as an epigenetic writer enzyme contributes to the patterns of histone acetylation that enhance memory pathways related to learned behaviors such as foraging. Are they going to give you food to turn your food system on, and pretty soon you're going to be foraging? You're going to not know why you're going to the grocery store to buy more food? Is this what they do with? This is why you can't eat just one Lay's potato chip? Inquiring minds at this point, folks. I don't have a clue. When they're talking at this level of manipulation and the ease with which that they can cause it, or the vulnerability, anything seems to be on the table. Differences in the CBP activity between minor and major castes may guide uniform patterns of gene expression that fine-tune neuronal functions for each caste. Think about caste as in class in societies of people. Think of your future, folks, and being placed someplace because your tests were just right. Your access to internet, when you have these psychopaths that are called psychiatrists and psychologists who write these tests, who are actually testing for the response to the feed they gave you, the injections they gave you, the medicines they gave you, that are all interacting to adjust this. And the data they're keeping behind the scenes that you don't realize, why Obamacare is really the scary part of what that's all about. Big data. For mammalian studies, it's clear this is an important protein involved in learning and memory, Berger noted. The finding that CBP plays a key role in establishing distinct social behaviors in ants strongly suggests that the discoveries made in ants may have broad implications for understanding social organization. Now, these scientists speak in the may, in the possible. I'm suggesting to you this is beyond that. This is how scientists speak. They could just as easily be talking in the imperative, that it is and does. And you look around at the evidence of increased behavioral disorders, so-called, even whether or not they're invented by the psychiatrists themselves. But these things that have existed now that never existed before, all since recent. And it starts to paint the picture here that's really hard to deny. But this is not a may. We're in a living social petri dish. And they're just telling us about that. The Berger team also focused on precisely defining. This is really the horrifying thing to me. This keyed it up, folks. They got to know this, and this, of everything that seemed fascinating about this thing, they turned to this subject matter to focus their next research on. What was it? What would they be so interested to do? It would be efficiency, wouldn't it? They want to be able to know exactly how to most effectively influence what they're talking about, working toward. And they want to go after that vulnerability, don't they? Because they're parasites, they're psychopaths, and they're opportunists. And that's what they do here. The Berger team is now focused on precisely defining the epigenetic window of vulnerability. That almost put a chill down my spine, folks. They're now focused exactly where they need to if they were going to be intent on affecting your behavior through any various environmental influences. I don't underestimate now as well what we now call geoengineering in the sky. The concept of binary, possibly trinary and tertiary weapon systems. 1-part, 2-part, 3-part weapon systems. In other words, everything's inert until all the parts show up. And when you're dealing in these enzyme being a catalyst should really be a fascination to you. The catalysts are very interesting in what happens in our reality here. That when you get all the right things together, they just go off. They just do their thing. And it's kind of like a rote response. You take a little bit in, you get a little bit of vaccine, take a little bit in your food, you get a little bit out of the air in your lungs, the worst place you could probably get it for a mucus transmission. And pretty soon you got all the environmental elements in to combine in your system to create a weapon system against you that triggers this process. So, they're now focused on that window of vulnerability. Remember, this is in the young. This is the heinous part coming in now. Hope you pick this, just follow this one. This vulnerability is in the young. She explains that understanding the mechanisms of when and how this window is open and how changes are sustained and why the window closes as the major ants age may have profound implications for explaining human vulnerability to early life exposures. Kind of speechless all here, folks. This is the notice to us it's happening. I know maybe that is conjectural. I can't really prove it. I can't disprove it. And I know that these people are sitting there to do things, and I think that they maybe even do it because they think it's a good, I'm doing it for the good reason. Here's the point. They're not asking anybody. They're just doing this stuff. Oh, it's fine to research it, but you know it didn't come without a payment somewhere in someone's interest. And that interest is not usually fostered independently like you and I might have been. Oh, let's go see what this magnifying glass does to this ant over here. And we finally grow out of that and we go into, oh, well, let's see what their structures are. How do we now pour lead into their nests so we can see what their nests look like? And eventually we come to the origination. Maybe we should just leave the critters alone and just watch what they do. Or maybe find less destructive ways to go about studying. And try to be living within our ignorance is expanded to live within the harmony that maybe it should be. No, we come in and we learn how to find the vulnerabilities of things. Yet focusing on this acetyltransferase enzyme that catalyzes the transfer of acetyl groups, which compress or expand this condition, this DNA packaging, for receptivity or not in the transcription activation of these genes, is that they now use to control behavior. That they tell you they're only focusing on one or two does not mean that they don't know about the rest or any others. Should really concern you. On transcriptional activation, these are all kind of long words, but they're important to keep track of. One of the beautiful things I wanted to point out, this is the thing, you start reading this stuff and you go, wow, these people are dealing with a neutron bomb and don't realize it. And yet this is the expert speaking like they know. And they admit at every turn, science really doesn't. They just tinkerers. But here they're tinkering with your social behavior, they're tinkering with your behavior, with your existence, with your life, with your size, with how you go about life, with your sexual reproduction, all of your existence. They're tinkering. And it looks like they're actually already doing it. But here's what discussion of transcriptional activation, when they're doing the manipulation. One of the beautiful things about the biology is that you don't have to fully understand it to put it to good use. The engineers who design spacecraft may need a certain working familiarity with all the parts in their system, but biologists, and particularly biologists whose mission is to treat human disease, And you know that it's just treating, not curing. Understand these little word distinctions. Human disease can treating, not curing, can make do with considerably more ignorance. One reason for this difference is that biological control usually is exerted through linear pathways of protein-protein interactions. Why I tell you, at that point, I tell you, the mere invasion of a cell to do the DNA modification is an invasion that creates unintended protein-to-protein consequences and interactions, which I haven't found anybody. I got a couple of them on my Twitter feed by accident. I don't even know how they're there, but there they are. I have to suffer this, and I do. I want to see what their mindset is. They will not answer how that anybody's looked at this problem. That this article before tells us they are using these very things for behavioral control studies. But going back to read what this transcriptional activation's about, and that you can be considerably more ignorant when you deal with it, because the intervention at the single known point of the pathway is sufficient to capture the pathway in its entirety. So that we can bomb is at the intersection. We don't got to worry about the effects of it one way or the other, even if it's a good effect. We don't know. We just bomb it right there. We control that border. We don't have to know what the rest does. And this is the mentality. We're going to push the cherry red button on the atomic bomb. We don't know that it's not going to continue the fusion process or the interaction, the reaction process to envelop the whole environment. Well, we're going to push that button anyway. And they did. Sounds like this. We can be pretty ignorant about this stuff because we've found the trigger point. A very elegant and potentially far-reaching example of this phenomenon appears in the current issue of the Proceedings. One, the biological pathway in question is the initiation of gene transcription. Transcriptional initiation of eukaryotes. I knew I messed that one up. I had it pronounced before. Continue. Requires the assembly of scores of proteins into superstructure at the gene promoter. The precise identities of these proteins and their order of assembly, while beginning to come into focus, are still quite the mystery. And these people are dinking with your lives, folks. This so-called science is quite the mystery. They admit it here. They admit you can be considerably more ignorant in biological processes because we can trigger and control a control point. We don't have to know the rest, is what they say. That's your behavior, folks. That's your life. That's your feed system. That's your food. That's that's the licenses they issue. All on what they promote as best sciences is a mystery to the expert. And over again, how many times have I pointed that out to you over the years? This mystery and ignorance is promoted as best sciences. And they're tinkering with your lives. And they just admitted that they're doing it behaviorally, and they're focused on that. And they're after the little ones. Why? Because they're particularly vulnerable. On the one hand, I think it's fascinating, just marvelous, that our little monkey mind can work this out. On the other hand, we move it on over and we're looking as opportunists and vulnerabilities for social control and behavioral control. Maybe I read too much there. Maybe you're interested. Maybe you're not. This was a wow thing for me. This is like a big admission of what's being allowed to go under science. That is what is in the news today when you're seeing social justice, when you're seeing behavioral controls as the underlying motive to imposition of things like the A2030, Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, Global Governance. The movies that you see about societies in the future, your place within the society, your limited access, your control all the time. With respect to chemicals being injected to maintain your behavior. I was advised to watch The Giver. You may be enjoyed to watch that. I was able to find it online. The Giver 2014. Not a bad movie, not a great, fantastic movie, but boy, if it doesn't talk about this vulnerability insertion, I don't know what else might, folks. So, this is the notice. This is not, to me, this is not fear-mongering. This is I will take this, and I do take this, as notice that they have been working and know way more than they're telling us about environmental controls that affect us and our behavior. And I'm not talking about how grumpy you get when you didn't get lunch, but that's an indicator. It's not the type of thing I'm talking about, but it's an indicator that you can have your behavior controlled by your diet, all by yourself. That they're working on it on a behavioral control system level to find the vulnerable point to maintain that control. And once they get that control and they get you to be habitualized to serving your own self, once they get you all to be considered to be diabetic and you need your injection because they keep lowering the standard on what it takes to be a diabetic, so they got most of the population thinking they're diabetic, doing their insulin injections together with this stuff that maintains this environmental constraint. How smooth that would come. And over time, you forget that's not normal. Over time, they get everybody to start doing it just because they said, oh, that's the healthy thing to do. Oh, and if you don't do it, you don't get your Obama scare. You don't get to go to work. You don't get your vaccine, so you're not going to work. You can't be seen in public places. So easy. Do they have this coming down on us? It's really a scary thought for the future. You and I, not so much. But I don't like the idea, and I really have to take a step back. Actually, when I learned about when you don't eat and you get kind of grumpy, you should pay attention to that. It's telling you they're getting grumpy because you're not eating. You got to go eat something. I'm one of those type of people that kind of just goes off and I just keep going. And so I'm kind of susceptible a little bit to that. But once someone pointed that out, that we all, working together with people, you find at times you're kind of grumpy with each other. And you look at each other, you start laughing because, oh, we didn't eat yet. Then you go have lunch. And it kind of stabilizes back out. That this is a very simple proof in my mind that you can be controlled as well when someone else knows that about you and you don't know it about you. Or you can't do anything about your food sources, your feed sources, your air supply, and everything like that. And we don't know about the possible binary weaponry or trinary weaponry systems that they are using in order to keep us. We've heard about things like fluoride and this and that can be a direct contributor to mental incapacity. Maybe it's affecting the system. The point is that this article is telling us that our behavior is controllable, external to us, in real time, independent of our DNA. They're actually taking advantage of the marvelous nature of the body to heal itself, because one of these factors is the ability to limit damage in the DNA transcription. And you heard that they're talking about targeting and interfering with that so that they can develop certain responses that are not developed or redeveloped so that the body handles them in a different way and produces a different response. This is, in a way, you can see that you can call it the eugenics. This is the social technocratic control. This is your future today. They're telling you today. They're knowing about it. I'm telling you within the context of that article, they are admitting it has been going on. I've euphemistically called it a feed system. I mean, with reason. It's not food, what they produce, it's feed. This is feed with a purpose. Not just to make you fat or sick or whatever. This is to control you, control your offspring, control your number of your offspring. Maybe that you might even not have offspring. Wonder why all of a sudden we have a bunch of midgets popping out for people instead of people. Wonder why we all get everybody underneath some disability that's defined in us that we have to take pills all the time. Get our daily injection. Because after the window of vulnerability, it's a lot harder to do it. We got to get the patient, the slave, to take his own medicine. And we'll just set it up so that it's just the right thing to do. And we'll set it up so his social credit, it's not, his loyalty to the government is questioned to the fact that until he starts taking his stuff, his drugs that he doesn't know about, he's not going to get that social credit. And if he does it that bad, we're going to come in and under community care, we're going to make it, we'll give him, for his own good, we'll give him his drugs. If you don't see the writing on the wall here and we don't step up about that, soon, we're going to be incapable at some future time, I suspect. In the giver, you're going to have to be the one that's chosen, that decides to, that works with another one that was chosen, and those two do something to stop it. And it may not be the right answer. We don't know. They talk about the ruin. They survived the ruin. The decision is to go back to that ruin. What desperate thoughts we have, folks. We respond in improper ways. We respond really too late. I've been trying to call out. Just respond. Just get in it, folks. Get wherever you can. Get that wind under your sails. Get that walk in your feet. Just get the exercise for it. Learn what that's about. The time is here. That this science, this chemistry will be your future. It's going to be the great thing. It really, that was another propaganda. It might be. But you know, the reason why legislation and regulation's on is because people can get greedy. You know, they succumb to those things, and ego and these other things. They don't realize they don't understand the universe, and they can't know it all to have an answer. And that maybe they're not always right. And we all can't put ourselves on the pedestal. I mean, we can be focused on what we do, and we can be really good at what we do there. And we could really be better, maybe, than most people around us in that thing. But ultimately, we don't have the answer to the universe. It is literally beyond us. And so we make stuff up. And we call that good, and then we exalt people on the made-up stuff. The mysteries. We can be ignorant and deal in biology because we've found the main trail that affects you. And then they didn't tell you about that. Should be horrifying that this is really allowed onto us. That it is depicted in movies and stories and books, and it should be, this is in us to have done. Therefore, it's going to be required in us to stop it. And the one that acts in the direction and puts the impetus, the English on the cue ball, is the one that's going to get that ball going, rolling in the direction it needs, and do the magic it needs to have done, contrary to everybody else's wishes watching. So you can't really maintain forever the status of a watchman. You're going to have to engage before that comes over you, and over time your life gets devolved into something that's made and remade contrary to your wishes. Thank you for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed that, and I hope we get an apprehension of what's possibly on the horizon for us, and that we can get involved to do certain things, again, where you can. Support the server costs and the websites that we use, and reallibertymedia.com and Grimner's work and the servers they have, and worldtruth.org social network. The servers, a Spreaker account is paid for, it costs money. If you can contribute to all that, otherwise content to markonthebeast.yahoo.com, that can be helpful. And thank you for the emails. Again, this week went so fast I haven't really got to my emails. Some I got to, some I didn't, to respond to y'all. UCY.tv, another syndicate real-time broadcast going on, and thank you all there, and the terrestrial broadcasters. Whatever you can do to contribute to that, whatever you can do to get the word out, pass the podcast around, help out, become part of the, and again, quality information is needed by people. Like I see a lot of people going to Bundy, going to Burns is not, they're interested, but they're seem to be, again, crickets. So we got to really stop this. We're harming ourselves. We're going to harm ourselves, and those other people are going to use that against us to keep us harmed and harming ourselves and keep control. And pretty soon the biology is going to be against us. The chemistry is going to be against us. Thank you very much.